This is Corey. Corey, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Corey. I am also in the neurotherapy field. I have a background in functional medicine, so I speak a lot from the biological and physics interactions of the body, the mind, and the soul, how we function, how we work, how the codes of consciousness work, and my whole role here on Earth is to be a guide for others back to themselves and back to connection with something greater than all of us. And really that has led me to understand the limitations of clinical approaches, where clinical approaches are amazing, and they're amazing to meet us where we're at and help heal certain things, but ultimately at the end of the day, the true alignment is alignment with a purpose greater than ourselves. And that is what I've seen consistently time and time again, is the ultimate healing force that I've ever witnessed. So my whole goal is to help illuminate the science of all of it and help others find their way back to their higher purpose, because I know that once people are there, they are in a perpetual state of healing, and they actually reverberate out more healing to others. So that's me.
Yeah. And that's obviously, part of why we chose to do this presentation. Coming from more of the mental health side, I've seen how important it is for people to have that sense of purpose and meaning in life. And we also talk a lot about recommendations, and here you can do this, you can do that, and then we struggle to actually complete those. And we've seen that with clients over and over struggling to actually implement some of the goals and the changes that they have for their life. And recently we've been noticing that there's this big shift taking place in our world, where I'm just seeing so many of our clients and friends, family, they're starting to reconsider that, maybe their careers or their relationships or their lifestyle aren't really in alignment with their highest potential. And so, we see them setting goals and trying to achieve those goals, but then struggling. And as you saw in the description, the statistics show about 8% are actually achieving those goals. So we wanted to take what we have learned over the years and what's helped us to align with our purpose, as well as just consolidating this multitude of information out there from different books and research articles and documentaries, and just see if we can kind of put some stuff together for you to give you a little bit of guidance and help you in your next steps towards pursuing your purpose. So with that said, why don't we dive in? So, by the way, we're going to be doing this presentation, presenting everything that we've put together, and then we're going to have time at the end for questions, conversation, open to any of your ideas or things that you've learned. We have a lot of information to cover, so we're trying to fit that within the hour. And then we're open to staying longer for those who want to stay longer. So there's not like a hard cutoff at 7, but anyone who does need to get off at 7, feel free to, get off whenever you need. Okay? So, looking at the problem, at least this is how we see it. So, many of us, we have been so focused on making a living that we forget to make a life, right? We may have been pressured into our careers, or we're feeling stuck in relationships. A lot of people just dread getting up and going to work in the morning. They're counting down the hours till the weekend, and during the weekend, they're just trying to forget about the week, right? Just zone everything out and binge on pizza and Netflix. And so we find that, obviously this isn't usually the life that people are wanting to live, right? And sometimes there are even things that in alignment in the past, but they're no longer in alignment for us. And so our first thing is we want you to know that it is okay to change, right? Sometimes there are shifts needed in our life and we can go with that flow. But a lot of people are just living from this perspective of, what their loved ones or their society tells them they're supposed to do rather than what they're really drawn to or called to, right? So they keep pushing through each day despite how miserable it makes them, or they're exhausted. And then, I see a lot of us, we try to set goals and we're like, okay, so if I can just do this, then I can be happy, right? Then I can have more energy. And sometimes then we get stuck in this endless to-do list of like distracting ourselves with, okay, I've got this goal and I'm going to check things off. But they're not actually aligned with what we are truly desiring in life, right? And a lot of us struggle to actually achieve those goals because they're not in alignment. So then we find ourselves feeling stuck. We're feeling hopeless. And we'll be talking a lot more about dopamine throughout this presentation because we see that a lot of people in our society are dealing with dopamine mismanagement and burnout. And that leaves them feeling really fatigued, low motivation, distractible. So obviously that's not helping the process. We also see limiting beliefs and limiting mindsets. A lot of people are unclear of their direction. So of course, if you don't know where you're going, it's hard to make progress there. We get stuck in destructive habits that aren't helping us. And really, we think that one of the biggest issues underneath all of this is that misalignment with our true purpose. We've seen that this misalignment is often underlying a lot of our physical and mental health ailments. Okay, so one of our goals with this presentation is to provide you some solutions per se, right? Some guidance. And the first thing that we want to recognize is that it's not always easy to find or align with our purpose, right? So we want to give you a little bit of guidance on how to find your purpose, and then also how to determine what is or isn't in alignment with that highest self and that purpose. Okay, we need to recognize what's been holding us back and reset our dopamine system so that we have the energy and the oomph needed to move forward. We want to also work on our brain wellness because our brain plays a huge role in that motivation. It's also setting us up for, being able to engage our cognitive functions to set and achieve goals and make the changes needed in our life and regulate our stress so that that doesn't get in our way. We'll also be talking about adjusting our mindset, our beliefs, our goals, our habits, and our expectations in a way that will support you in your path. And then also talk about tools and strategies that can really set you up for success. So as we're talking about goals, we need to realize that goals are usually related to this desired future state. And then there's a set of acts that move us towards that attainment of the end state. Okay, so they require this intention and action. And usually we create goals because we want something to happen that hasn't happened yet and isn't likely to just naturally happen on its own. So we need to set a goal to be able to take those steps. Oftentimes it also involves doing something different than what has been done before, right? Because again, if we were already there, we wouldn't need to set a goal to get there, right? So why do we set goals? Okay, now first and foremost, setting goals helps us fill our cup. Okay, so you might have heard the phrase that you can't pour from an empty pitcher, right? And the concept of this is that, we need to fill up our pitcher so that we have what it takes to be able to give back and give to others. And that means really finding our wellness and our balance within our physical health, our emotional, cognitive, spiritual, and financial well-being. The more these are aligned and helping to fill us up, then the more we are in a place to be able to give back and pursue that purpose. So we will be talking about how we can align in these different areas. We've also found that when we achieve goals, it boosts dopamine and serotonin, which is nice for our emotional well-being. And then, of course, the secondary benefits of goals is, for example, if we're setting a goal to eat healthier, then that healthy nutrition helps balance all of our body systems at all levels, which again gives us that energy to be able to move forward on our life path. Exercise has been found to boost levels of BDNF, which is like our brain's miracle grow. It helps our brain to grow new neurons, new connections, so that makes us more adaptable. It helps us learn new things. We're also fostering a growth mindset, so that allows us to embrace challenges and failures as opportunities. It allows us to learn and grow, and then boosts our sense of purpose and helps us take practical steps toward a fulfilling life. Okay, so these are some of the benefits that goals can have for us. Whoops. Slow down. Okay, so I just love this ancient proverb. It says, "Our passions are winds that propel our vessel. Our reason is the pilot that steers her. Without winds, the vessel would not move, and without a pilot, she would be lost." So, why do our goals often fail? Okay, why is it that we constantly, every single year, we set these goals and then we struggle to actually achieve them or maintain them? So, first and foremost, they tend to be misaligned with our self and purpose. If it's misaligned, then we're going to really struggle because it's like pulling teeth, or it's a really effortful process. If our goals are focused just on goals, they're not as likely to succeed as if they are purpose-driven. Okay, so looking not just for ourselves, but beyond ourselves. It's we-driven versus me-driven. Okay. We also have to look at forced motivation versus spontaneous motivation, or what we like to call flow. Okay, so if we're really trying to force it, it's going to be a lot more challenging and less sustainable. If it's effortful and obligation-based, so we have to do it, or pressure to do it, as opposed to the mindset of we get to do this. A lot of people tend to focus so much on the destination that they also lose joy in the process. And aligning with purpose is more of a process-oriented thing where we can find joy every step of the way. There's an attachment to outcomes, and then an if, when, then mindset. So a lot of times we think that if I achieve this goal, then I'll be happy, right? Or when I get this, then I will be able to fulfill my purpose, or whatever it is. And again, that takes us out of the present moment. So we're not accepting our present moment, and we're not in our present moment where that is where we can take steps forward, right? So that's another piece that we think contributes. A substance versus a fundamental approach to goal setting. We find that, the fundamental piece is just what is like the purpose itself, versus the substance and assumptive is what the goal is related to. So for example, we think that if we lose weight, then we'll feel better about ourselves, therefore we want to lose weight, as opposed to like feeling better about ourselves every step of the way and moving towards weight loss for the purpose of just being healthy, right? one of the big ones I see is setting unrealistic goals. So we go too big, too fast, too much, right? So we find that if we have too big of jumps, then we can't make that big of a jump. We need to take smaller steps. You know, we've seen that some of the most successful people in life have realized that starting small is where they really can make an impact, and then you grow as that succeeds. Then we have inaccurate time expectations, so we expect it to come faster than it's going to take. That's usually what I see, but it can be over or under. We over-externalize, and we have a lack of clear direction, so we don't know the way to get there. And then the next thing, as I mentioned, is dopamine mismanagement and burnout. So dopamine, it's an amine neurotransmitter, also a hormone, and this neurotransmitter is largely connected to our motivation and reward. So the motivation is connected to various brain regions, including the basal ganglia, the prefrontal cortex, and our default mode network, and plays a big role in our memory, our personality, and our attention. And then the reward side is more connected to our nucleus accumbens, which is related to consolidation, myelination, which is what preserves new connections, and our attention and validation. Okay, so with dopamine, it's really a prediction hormone. So it's predicting the future, and it's trying to predict what's going to give me a reward and what's not. Okay, so when we are pursuing a goal or a reward and we achieve that goal, then we see, okay, our dopamine, we have this expectation was met, dopamine comes up a little, then it comes back down, and we're back to baseline. Okay. Now, if we get an unexpected reward, so this is kind of like, I like the example of a vending machine. So you go to a vending machine, you put your money in, you get a candy bar. Great, expected reward. You put your money in, you get 2 candy bars. That's the unexpected reward. So then you get an even higher hit of dopamine, right? But then there's the negative prediction error, where we have the expectation to achieve a reward and we don't get that reward. The candy bar gets stuck. Okay, then we see dopamine actually decreases afterwards. It plummets. So this is one of the risks with too big of goals, because if we're starting here and then we set our goal way up here and we can't make that big of a jump, then we have a dopamine crash, which actually makes it harder to try again the next time. So we'll be talking about the approach based in neuroscience of how we can really set ourselves up for success with more of that balanced, maintained dopamine release, as opposed to either the shooting up and dropping or the plummeting. Now, dopamine is not selective. Dopamine can be released to reinforce positive behaviors or negative behaviors. Okay, so for example, there's something called shaping, where our brain learns, okay, this thing gave me a reward, so I'm going to keep pursuing that thing related to that reward. So for example, we have a bad day, we eat a donut, we feel a little bit better, so then every time we have a bad day, we are drawn to a donut, right? Now, with substance use, we find that you get that greater than expected reward, so that greater than expected dopamine release. And the challenge with that is you get these big spikes, right? And then your brain comes to expect that level of reward. So then the next time you engage with that same substance, you have the expectation that that will be repeated. And then when that's not met, then you get the dopamine plummet, right? So it's almost like it sets a new expectation, a new baseline that is even harder to measure up to, especially with just normal day-to-day rewards, as opposed to these external things like substances. Now, we have in here that we are all dopamine addicts, and basically this is on the concept that all of our brains like dopamine, right? And dopamine is what reinforces behaviors. So anything that is releasing dopamine, that we tend to think of like, okay, yeah, you know, cocaine, of course you get a big dopamine hit, but it's also released with a lot of other things like screen time. We get a dopamine hit from the blue light on our screens. We'll talk a little more about that. We can get dopamine hits from sugar, right? From obviously other addictive behaviors. So we need to just be aware of that. And then we also have addictions to what we call ego as endless goal operations. Okay, so this is where, you know, it's based on this image here, we have our attention gets brought to these past experiences and expectations, and those correlate with certain anxieties, right? And then we spend a lot of our time paying attention to these past experiences and medicating pain from these past experiences. And then that shows up in our identity. So it links to our identity related to these past experiences. And that reinforces this cycle where we get stuck in this loop, going round and round, living in our past, trying to medicate our pain, rather than really moving forward. Okay. We also tend to then set goals where it's like, okay, if I can, betray my peace and joy now, then I will get it later. So we engage in things where it's like, okay, I'm just going to suffer and I'm going to push through right now because I want the reward later. And that's another thing that oftentimes leads to a burnout because we're not in flow. So there's so many ways that this loop can kind of get us stuck and get in our way.
So the easiest way to sum up dopamine is that it is associated with everything outside of the here and now, as Dr. Daniel Lieberman says. That means that any thought, feeling, sensation, or inclination to want to change something about the current moment will automatically involve dopamine. So dopamine not just consolidating, but also moving us towards something different. Right? So when we think about dopamine, that what I always tell people is it's like so many people think the myth of it is that when I get a reward, I get dopamine. And yes, kind of true, but actually dopamine's being released on the entire pursuit of the reward. So if I run out of cigarettes and I need a cigarette, I am going to start moving towards the car, driving towards the store, going in, getting the cigarettes, opening the cigarettes out, pulling the cigarette out, lighting the cigarette, and then my dopamine hits its peak and it starts decreasing, right? And this is part of the loop of addiction. So the more present that I can be with what is now, the more effective I can manage my dopamine. And I'm going to talk to you guys about a few more tricks in regards to this. But the reality is that even thinking about wanting something different than what is right now is pushing dopamine out. So you can understand now things like social media, right? As I'm scrolling social media, I'm constantly visualizing and imagining all these various different scenarios constantly. Something that isn't now in my reality, right? And so this is a big piece as to why our dopamine is so burned out. We're constantly thinking about something that's not now, right? And this is the power of mindfulness. You can go to the next slide. So ego, as Ashlie said, endless goal operations. So I think, the biggest challenge that you're ever going to have with regards to aligning with your purpose is that your purpose is not going to be aligned with what everybody else is doing. And it's also not going to be aligned with the familiar, which means you're automatically at war with the ego. Because the ego is all about familiarity and all about fitting in. It's all about what it's been told, how it's culturally been programmed. It's also designed to keep us in the familiar. And we call this the illusion of homeostasis. Homeostasis means like a balanced state in the body. And so we get these illusions of homeostasis where we think that, oh, I'm good with where I'm at. But really we don't have the knowing because we don't have the experience of what could be if we were actually actualized in our potential. So ego does a good job of convincing us that we're okay where we're at. We don't want to change. And there's a twofold process where part of it is fully accepting where you're at, but also fully opening yourself to what can unfold for you. And what you will find is ego will be trying to hold you back. Ego also does this thing of dualism where it says right, wrong, black, white, up, down, hot, cold, victim, perpetrator, I won, I lost, right? And this is another piece that takes a huge toll on the dopamine system, because for me, when I move forward into life and I project what I feel like is my aligned purpose, I am going to have events that are gonna occur. And the more that I can drop the idea of judgment of whether that's good or bad or right or wrong, or, oh, this guy did this and so this means this about him, the more I can just go, okay, that wasn't aligned. Okay, what can I learn from this experience? It becomes something that I'm not in the loop of avoidance and attraction. I'm actually just fully open to whatever every experience is revealing to me, and I let that move me. I let that upgrade my subconscious mind through the experience. The other thing with ego is that it's lagging behind reality. So it's at least 1/10,000th of a second removed from the present moment. When we look at event-related potentials in the brain, we see that it's actually as much as 300 milliseconds removed. So that means that before ego can recognize what's happened, it's already been 300 milliseconds. So it's not experiencing what actually is, it's experiencing its experience of what is, or more accurately, its perception of what the experience means, which again can easily put us into avoidance and attraction, where, ooh, this experience satisfied my ego, therefore I want more of it. Or this actually didn't feel good to the ego, therefore I want to avoid it. And oftentimes we find ourselves bypassing these very potent experiences that are trying to bring us towards our purpose, but because we judge them and we avoid them, we push them away, we get ourselves stuck. And the other thing the ego loves to do is it loves to be the author. I did this, then this happened, and then now I'm blank, right? I did this, now this person's mad at me, now I'm even more stuck, right? And the reality is, again, that when you understand consciousness, is every moment is just unfolding from itself. The ego has no control over how those moments unfold. The only thing that we have control over is our response and our reflections of the wisdom that we extract from that experience. And so with dopamine as a currency is the best way to describe dopamine is if we are not embodying ego, we will not burn out dopamine. We won't. It doesn't mean that we aren't doing things, or we aren't moving, or we aren't motivated, but what it means is that there is an unconscious movement, that there's a spontaneous motivation in which I can ride the wave of the dopamine bank account, so I'm not putting more dopamine out than I need to. And so, the biggest thing in our society is we stack dopamine. So, I have a movie on in the background, I'm listening to music, I'm trying to have a conversation with my friend, and I'm scrolling social media. The multitasked nature of our reality, and so many people tell, I'm such a good multitasker. No, you're not. Nobody is. We're one-track minds, right? So when we start stacking dopamine like this, what happens is, if you see the blue line here on the graph, is we actually get this massive crash in dopamine. And that's the thing with dopamine, is we get a release of it, but there's always a refractory period that we have to undergo, right? Which is, I mean, you see this with buyer's remorse, where I buy something and now I get home, and by the time I get it home, it doesn't really have the same hit as it did before. Right, because you were looking for yourself in that external thing. And now the dopamine burnout is going to be even greater from that. The other thing is, the greater the need that we have for something, so the more that we tell ourselves that we need something, the more dopamine's pushed out, because the survival mechanism is, oh my God, we need this right now. So we need more dopamine. We need to get this thing now. We can't wait, right? The more I have that need, the greater the crash as well. And then, as Ashlie described, the more expectation, the more attachment I have to the expectation, the greater the fall as well. So if I recognize there's always going to be expectation, and this is the thing with the mind, it's not about controlling the mind, it's about not letting the mind control you. So there's always going to be expectation there. I'm the choice maker of whether I grab that and I start riding it, or I go, oh, there's that expectation, and oh yeah, maybe. No, that'd be cool if that happened, right? Now I'm not bonded to the expectation of that, and my dopamine can stay more regulated. So those are a few tips with regards to the dopamine burnout. Is again, lower the need for, lower the expectation to, and try to be mindful with everything you're doing, right? Like, I can still, walk fast, but be mindful, right? I can be in the mindfulness seat while I'm walking fast, right? Or while I'm doing things, I can be mindful. I don't have to be pulled into the experience and become part of the drama of everything that's unfolding. And if you're able to do that, you're going to be able to manage your dopamine for endless amounts of motivation. But again, as Ashlie said, it will be more of the spontaneous motivation, where I'm all of a sudden I'm called to do something. I'm called to reach out to somebody. I'm called to do this. I don't always know why, but there's going to be the space for that, and the miracles that are going to open up are amazing. So this I guess this bridges into what I was just saying, is power versus force. So intrinsic motivation comes from a place of called to. Like I actually feel joy, even not always joy, but there's like a pull. It's like a magnetic. It was like the first time that I learned about quantitative EEG. I was in my master's degree up in Canada, and I learned about quantitative EEG brain mapping, and I couldn't get it out of my awareness. And I didn't know why at the time, and now I'm here, which is funny, and I would have never imagined that these are the types of things we'd be using it for, but that's that intrinsic motivation. There's something in you that's just pulling you, right? The extrinsic imprinting, the extrinsic motivation is more related to what I think I need to do, what I think I need to be, the ego, who I think I am, right? The character, the mask, all of this, right? And so if we can align with inner purpose, we're going to be able to move into higher states of consciousness, which Ashlie is going to talk a little bit more about later. And we can let go of shame and guilt and grief and fear and desire and anger, all these things, because we don't feel like we need to control our world. And we're also not taking things personally, right? So if I don't feel shame if I don't take things personally, right? If something unfolds and there's learning in it for me and there's learning in it for other people, what do I have to feel shameful about, right? I'm not taking it personally anymore. So when we can come from that intrinsic motivation of, I'm humble, I'm open, I'm curious, I'm just enjoying the process, there's also an attraction component that comes from that, rather than a chasing or a seeking component. And so this is always how you know the difference between if you're being called to or if ego is getting involved, which it's its favorite pastime. It's the peanut gallery. It's always getting involved, but is the seeking energy. If I'm seeking something from out there and I'm not letting it come in, I'm an ego and therefore in force and therefore at risk for dopamine burnout. And the beautiful thing is that the nervous system is always guiding me back to center. So if I burn my dopamine out, I'm literally flat out in dorsal vagal state. I can't do anything anyway. Great, that's exactly what needs to happen. And then I need to extract the wisdom from why that was. And it's not the what I was doing, it's the how I was doing it. It's the energy that I was coming from. Sorry, Ash, is this you, Ash, or is this me? Oh, it's me. All right, so the 3 paths here that we're going to go through. Keys to the castle, so to speak. Knowing yourself, knowing your why, and knowing your way. And Socrates, one of my favorite philosophers of all time, had a very famous, very short quote. If Ashlie goes to the next slide, know thyself. And I like to say this as knowing thyself is knowing the true self, the who we really are, not the ego self that has been imprinted upon us or that we've created as a mask for survival. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about just how epic we are and how just amazing, like what we've learned in science. For me, this really propels me to be present. There's a little bit of a like, wow, how incredible is all of this? So one of the first epic scientific findings, which actually overlays with a lot of spiritual wisdom, is the zinc spark. And so this is actually, Ashlie, you can play the video. I'm hoping it's on mute. I can kind of just walk people through, but there is an event that happens when we are a sperm and an egg, and this sperm and this egg meet, and when they meet, there is a release of light that is on the cellular level equatable to the power of the sun. And this is what Einstein essentially died trying to solve, this problem of uniting what's called general relativity and quantum gravity. But essentially it's like a black hole opens up and light becomes bound to mass. And that is what results in this massive release of zinc ions, which we call the zinc spark, out of the embryo. So what this actually shows, if you look at spiritual literature and things like talking about the soul, is that light from the quantum field comes from somewhere and comes into this cell as the sperm and egg meet, and then starts creating this incredible body that we have, and all of its capacities and the capacities of the brain. And so essentially what this is showing is that we are non-localized consciousness embodying a physical vessel, which is absolutely incredible. This finding blows my mind. So yeah, we are light tied to mass. So it's just further confirmation of what lots of religions and spiritual teachings have taught for a long time, is that we are not this body. We are not even this mind. We are not this life, right? We are the observer, the awareness behind everything that's unfolding. And this is really important because this is the source of all of the suffering, of all of the dopaminergic tragedies. All of it is that we start identifying and becoming the body and the life and the ego and the mind, instead of realizing that the fact that we can be aware of all of it means that we aren't it. It means that we are this part of us, but it's not the entirety of who we are. And this is really, really important as we move forward in this journey. I'm not going to go too much into detail on this, other to say than the quantum field is the field in which all matter arises. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance because as soon as we look at it and observe it, it changes. Very interesting. We're all entangled with it. There's ideas like quantum entanglement, quantum superposition. Great examples are when you meet somebody for the first time in memory, but it's like you've known them forever. There's something special. And we become entangled. We're all entangled in this whole quantum field. And so the really cool thing is now what we're learning in medicine with an organelle called the mitochondria is that almost every disease that you can go to the next slide, Ashlie. Almost every disease and disorder that we know of now is found to have originated in some way, shape, or form from the mitochondria, which derived from the oldest bacteria we know of on the planet. We don't really know where they came from, but these bacteria eventually made their way into an animal cell, and they're the powerhouse of the cell. They make energy. They're the only reason that we can build anything as complex as the human body. Without mitochondria, we wouldn't grow bigger than a few cells. The interesting thing is they actually couple to the quantum field. There's tons of great research on this. So the mitochondria are essentially aligning in the quantum field, which is the field where this light that came into this embryo that built this body came from. And when we're aligned in the quantum field, we make light, we make energy in the form of ATP. However, when things are misaligned, we start creating fire, and this is called the cell danger response. So this very interesting piece where there's an overlap of the soul's purpose with physical health issues, where our physical symptoms are actually signs and feedback to us as to whether we're aligned or not, right? If I'm inspired and I'm driven by purpose, you know how often I get sick with the flu? I don't. Before I was inspired and aligned with purpose, I got sick with the flu all the time. I was tired, I was fatigued, I was depressed, right? And again, I went down the functional medicine model of trying to fix all of the downstream issues that came from that, which worked for a period of time until, again, I still wasn't aligning. And so I was still starting myself on fire. It's this very interesting heaven-hell metaphor that we've been seeing. Now, the other really interesting thing with us is that we evolved from apes. And there's this very interesting way that we evolved from apes that we're now learning about. This was actually first found in 1991. There's whole conferences on human chromosome 2 because it's very interesting how it came to be. But what we understand now is about 200 to 250,000 years ago, there was an event that actually broke two chromosomes of ape chromosomes apart and glued them back together in something called a telomere fusion technique. Now, we don't have technology to do this. We don't know how this happened. But we know that it was a phenomenally special event that, again, we don't even have technology to do now. And the really interesting thing is it is actually responsible for the rise in cardiac sensory neurites, which means that we have brain cells in our heart called sensory neurites. There's about 40,000 of them. Ashlie, you can go to the next slide. The brain has actually brought itself into the heart, and there's magnetoreceptors. So the heart is actually sensing the magnetic field signatures around us. And most people kind of know this. If you walk into a room, you can feel the vibe, right? It's like, oh, the vibe's really, really weird in here. Or like, oh, the vibe's awesome in here, right? We don't even need to make sense of that experience yet. We already can feel the vibe of it, right? And we'll share some more science later on, but this is actually what we found in the science of intuition, is that humans have this really interesting capability to be intuitive, and it's a very simple technique. It's 40,000 sensory neurites. That's not a lot compared to the 100 trillion connections that we have in the brain, right? The mind and the brain is very complex, right? So if we can settle into the intuitive field, it's very simple. It'll help guide us. Our brain won't always understand why or how or what needs to happen next, but the heart sort of knows how to guide us if we can open our minds and our awareness up. But it seems to connect us to some unseen quantum world it's extrasensory. And there's Dr. Dean Radin and the Institute of Noetic Sciences has a lot of incredible research on this, but absolutely phenomenal. And then what happens from the magnetic field signatures in the heart is it actually changes the movement and the flow of the variability of our heart rate. So we can be in states of dysregulation and frustration, and we can also be in states of coherence, where we're regulated and that magnetic field is very quiet. It's not full of a lot of noise. And the very interesting thing is that people that have higher or more regulated coherence have less risk of all disease that we know of, cardiovascular, neurological, chronic fatigue, neuropsychiatric. So there's something to do with the mitigation of noise in our external reality from this magnetic field source that is the heart. And the other really interesting thing with this is that the heart is far more powerful than the brain. So we can pick up heart rate, magnetic field from the heart 200 feet away from the body. The brain's waves, we're lucky to be able to pick them up 2 millimeters from the skull. So there's something very potent about that heart field, and that the brain can never compete with. That's just an example of the toroidal field that the heart, the presence of the heart, the energetic heart center is actually creating. And this is actually what's attracting, and this is again my belief from my understanding of the physics of it all, is the heart is actually what's attracting in our reality, and the mind and the brain is making sense of it, and then helping adjust. And this is the heart-brain coherence, right? So the brain's making sense of, and then we can get these two into a union together, where the mind helps us align our embodiment so we can attract in something different, right? From the learned experience. The trouble becomes when ego, which is all centered in mind, tries to be the heart. And this is where the dopamine burnout happens, because the mind will never be the heart. I talked a little bit about this, but the complexity of the brain is it's incredible. Over 100 trillion synaptic connections, which, by the way, this seems to get greater every year that computational neuroscientists look at it. But nonetheless, we process 1 to 10 terabytes of information every second. So you think about your terabyte hard drive before we had all the streaming services we have now, right? How many, you could have like 1,000 movies on that thing, right? That's how much our brain is interpreting every second. And we're only aware of a minuscule amount of that, not even the tip of an iceberg amount of it, right? And our networks in our brain are shifting forward and backward, creating an updated view of reality, updating our sense of self while bringing in new information. And it's flashing like a light bulb, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And we're able to compute our reality from that place. So it's absolutely incredible what we've been gifted with. There's 8 components or dimensions of the human experience, and the way that we divide this up is what we can be aware of. So the environmental, we can be aware of what's outside of us, right? The physical body, we're aware that we have this physical body that we have some presence in, and the undertakings and the comings and the goings of the pains and the aches and the pleasures and all that. And then there's the bioenergetic field as well, which is more what I was talking about with the heart rate variability, where there's an energetic field we're not always able to sense all of it. We can detect a certain amount with our ears, with our eyes, with our touch sensation, but there's more to the field than that, and we are actually able to tune into it. We're just not able to tune into it with the traditional 5 senses. And then there's an emotional field. And again, this is a shared field, by the way. It's not all yours. You will feel other people's emotions, even if you're not an empath. So there's a feeling field. We can be aware of our emotions, our feelings. We can also be aware of the mind and our thoughts. Right? That's where the thoughts are. We can be aware of archetypes, which is the idea of who I am, or my skills, or my strengths, or the fact that I'm a scientist, or I'm a healer, or I have the gift of gab, right? These are these types of things with regards to archetypes. And then there's an intuitive field, and this is that field of knowing. Like, I don't know why I know, but I know. Or I don't know exactly why, but I feel really pulled this way, and I gotta go do this thing or talk to this person, but I don't know why, right? That's the deep knowing in the heart. Or I know this is no longer good for me. I can try to validate it or come to grips with it all I want, but I know in my heart this isn't good for me anymore, right? And then there's the collective. We can be aware of the fact that other people are having these experiences through their own lens, through their own angle, right? So there's this 8-dimensional experience that we're all floating around in that is like this incredible video game that I could have never dreamed up. And that's the human experience. How incredible. How incredible. I can go to the next one, Ash. All right. So I want to just take a second to sort of let all that soak in. How we are powered by hydrogen fusion generators, aligning in a field that we can't look at directly without changing it and altering the effects of it. Spinning on a rock 33 million light years away from the next biggest star. 1.8 billion light years from the center of the Milky Way galaxy. Massive. Brilliant. So this is what I like to do every morning to help leverage my dopamine, is sit in awe. Not wanting to change any of it, sitting in just the vastness of all of it and the absolute miracle that I'm even here right now, able to be aware, able to share my thoughts, and for you guys to be able to actually receive them. It's just all such a miracle. Finding that place and moving into my day from that place and watching what unfolds. And I think one of my favorite quotes to end things off on this part is that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And I think the best example for me of this is the truth of who I really am. The truth of who I really am keeps whispering, keeps knocking, keeps pulling, keeps tugging, until I'm willing to listen to the call. And it's a beautiful fate. It's a beautiful fate.
All right. Thanks, Corey. That's, just amazing. Everything about us is so fascinating and so incredible. Just want to take a moment for time check and let you guys know that we are definitely going to go over an hour. We have a lot that we would love to share with you, so I'd love to go ahead and still provide all the information to you, and we will be recording this information, this whole presentation, so if you do need to leave at some point, then you will get the rest of it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just keep going forward to make sure you get all the content, all the tools, and then we'll take it from there. So the next thing we wanted to talk about was the quantitative EEG. Of course, in the neurotherapy field, we love quantitative EEG. It's like our North Star, right? It guides us. So basically what this is it's showing the electrical brainwave patterns and states, and can show us, where we have too much power, not enough power, connectivity patterns. It allows us to distinguish where and how the brain is out of alignment, and that includes showing us cues of where it might be out of alignment with our purpose, with our wellness. It helps us see old patterns that are no longer serving us. Sometimes if there's something that worked for us at one point in time, maybe when we were like 4 years old, our brain keeps repeating that pattern, but now it's actually getting in our way. Okay, so sometimes we can see those patterns in the QEEG, and it gives us guidance on what we need and where to direct our focus. It shows us different brainwave states, and there are different states that tend to be associated with like brainwaves and states of being. So, for example, our subdelta tends to be more connected with our environmental and our circadian rhythms. Our delta is more connected with our physical. The theta is more of our emotional. Alpha is more of that bioenergetic level. Beta and high beta tend to be more connected to our mind, intellect, archetypal, like personality, sense of self. And then gamma tends to be more aligned with these like spiritual, collective, intuitive aspects. Okay, so we can look at the whole combination of this, and all of those different components of our consciousness that Corey mentioned are also reflected in our brains and our brain scans. So it's pretty fascinating where we can see these different frequencies and how that aligns with our actual experience. This is an example of what the quantitative EEG looks like, and we can see where certain frequencies are on excess or deficiency. We can see connectivity patterns. And then we also have more advanced technology that's come out within the last decade that's called SW Loretta. This is a 3D source imaging. It gets a lot more specific and targeted, and within this we can see very specific regions that are potentially out of balance, how they're out of balance, and how that might be showing up for us. So we found the more specific we can get, the clearer the picture is for us to get that self-awareness and guidance for what we need to do. We also look at networks. So these three networks are three of the key networks in the brain that relate to our experience. It's called the triple network model. So essentially our default mode network is more associated with just like our sense of self, and it tends to be related to our self-referential thinking, our mind wandering, processing information related to the self and others. It's associated with more of our social cognition. And then our central executive network is more of what we consider the cognitive piece. So it's the goal-directed executive functions. It plays a really crucial role in tasks that require attention, working memory, decision-making, and problem-solving. So it's really vital for like cognitive control and flexibility of our thinking. And then the salience network is kind of the stick shift that helps shift between these networks, and it filters what is salient from the environment, what is relevant for us to be paying attention to. Okay, so imbalances in any of these three networks can really affect our ability to not only move forward with goals, but also align with what our heart truly desires in life. And then we also look at something called the alpha peak frequency, and this is a measure of kind of like an idling state in our brain. So it's a processing speed, and really what we found is that if we go too fast or too slow, it can create some issues for us. So if we're too fast, then we have this faster processing. It can be related to higher intelligence, but it also tends to contribute to things like anxiety, OCD, sleep issues, reactivity, hypervigilance. We see this more in like the executive type of person. And then on the too slow side, we have slower processing. We see this as a consequence of cognitive decline as we get older, brain injury, toxin exposure, ischemia, early trauma, and it tends to be more of like a tuned out state. But we also see it sometimes in healers that are tuning in to like really deep states of intuition. So some of this is finding balance between the too fast and the too slow, and some of it is also learning what is our natural alpha peak frequency and how do we utilize that to our advantage, and how do we also utilize that to guide us in what we're meant to do in this life. We can also look at archetypes. So archetypes are kind of like personalities, right? And there's a lot of different assessments that can help us understand ourselves through these personality assessments or these archetypal profiles. So it's generally the concept is that there's different types of people. We're not all the same. And within that type, we have certain gifts, certain strengths, and we also have certain challenges, right? Within that, we might also have purpose. So like the Jungian archetypes tell us a lot about like our potential true purpose in life. And then the things like Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, our ACT values quiz can help us to really get to know ourselves better and find what really lights us up, what's aligned, and help guide our next steps. And then also just really understanding our strengths. So there's obviously many different strengths, and we've got our typical things like open-mindedness, authenticity, kindness, right? And then we've also got things like, hey, I'm really good at starting things. Might not be good at finishing them, but I'm really good at starting them, right? Or I ask really good questions, or I tend to be more attentive to people's needs. So we can really feel into what are our unique strengths. We don't have to have every single strength, right? We just have to find what are our strengths and how can we utilize those. So there's different assessments that can also help you find your strengths. The other key piece is that we all have our own unique experience in life. We all have an origin story. So the origin story is known as like what happened to us or because of us that shaped the way we see the world, okay? And what I really want everyone to realize is that this doesn't have to hold us back. This is often what tries to hold us back, what tries to keep us stuck. But we can actually utilize that to guide us. So there's a quote by Brian Boucher, and he says, when you choose gratefulness over bitterness, your origin story can give you clarity as to who you are, who you want to become, and who you want to help. So even the traumatic experiences in our life can be a guiding light as to what do we want for others, what do we want for the world, how can we utilize our own unique experience to drive that. There's a quote by Lou Holtz that says, show me someone who has done something worthwhile and I'll show you someone who has overcome adversity.